My family left me dying in the ER while they debated whether my insurance would cover the ambulance ride. When my heart flatlined for the third time in 6 hours, they stepped outside to argue about parking fees. But when the deafening roar of helicopter blades shattered the silence at Riverside Medical Center and my tech mogul husband's private aircraft descended from the storm clouds like a guardian angel, everything changed forever. My name is Cassandra Vale, and if you think you know how this story ends, you're about to discover that some betrayals cut deeper than any scalpel, and some love stories are written in the clouds above emergency rooms where families choose money over miracles. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Trauma Bay 7 had been humming their mechanical lullaby for what felt like an eternity. 7 hours of watching my blood pressure plummet, 7 hours of listening to machines scream warnings that everyone seemed determined to treat like background music. Everyone except the medical staff, who moved around my bed with the kind of urgency that my own flesh and blood seemed incapable of mustering. My mother, Diane Ashford, sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair by the window, scrolling through her phone with the dedication of someone checking stock prices during a market crash. Every few minutes, she'd glance up at the monitors surrounding my bed, not with concern, but with the irritated expression of someone watching an expensive meter run up charges they didn't want to pay. My father, Gregory Ashford, had claimed the spot near the door, checking his Rolex every 30 seconds like he was timing a business presentation rather than watching his daughter fight for her life. His position by the exit wasn't coincidental. He'd been calculating his escape route since the moment the ambulance delivered me to Riverside Medical Center at 3 a.m. My younger sister, Natalie, had transformed the family crisis into her personal social media opportunity. She positioned herself in the corner with the best lighting, live streaming what she called her hospital vigil journey to her 20,000 followers, complete with motivational quotes about family strength and carefully angled selfies that captured just enough medical equipment to suggest drama without actually showing my deteriorating condition. I'd been rushed here from our family's Labor Day barbecue after collapsing during what should have been a celebration of my latest business milestone. The paramedics suspected severe allergic shock, but as the hours crawled by with my condition worsening rather than improving, it became clear this wasn't going to be a simple case of bad shrimp or bee sting sensitivity. My throat was closing systematically, my breathing becoming more labored with each passing hour, and my heart was struggling to maintain rhythm against whatever was attacking my system from the inside. Dr. Amanda Foster, the lead emergency physician, had explained the situation to my family in terms so clear that even a middle schooler would have grasped the severity. Cassandra is experiencing severe anaphylactic shock with complications we don't typically see, she had said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who delivered difficult news before but never quite like this. Her body is shutting down in waves. We've administered every standard treatment, but something is preventing her system from responding normally. We need to consider more aggressive interventions, possibly including surgical airway management. But my family wasn't focused on the medical emergency unfolding in real time. They were laser-focused on the mounting costs, the disrupted holiday plans, and the social inconvenience of having their Monday ruined by their daughter's inconsiderate timing in nearly dying. "How much is this going to run us?" had been my father's first question, not directed at me, but at Dr. Foster, as if my life was a service being quoted rather than a crisis being managed. "Does our plan cover emergency helicopter transport if she needs to be moved to a specialty facility?" my mother had asked, already calculating whether it would be cheaper to let me die at Riverside than to authorize potentially life-saving treatment elsewhere. Natalie had chimed in without looking up from her phone. "Can someone explain to my followers why we can't just give her some Benadryl and call it a day? They're asking in the comments and I want to give them accurate information for my content." Dr. Foster's expression had shifted from professional concern to barely concealed disgust as she realized what she was dealing with. This wasn't a family rallying around their loved one, this was a financial committee debating the cost-benefit analysis of my survival. The worst part wasn't their obvious irritation at having their holiday weekend disrupted. It wasn't even their transparent prioritization of money over my life. The worst part was watching them treat my medical crisis like an accounting error that needed to be corrected rather than a human being who needed to be saved. When my heart stopped for the first time around hour 4, they barely glanced up from their phones. The crash team flooded the room. Dr. Foster shouted orders that echoed off the sterile walls, and nurses moved with the practiced efficiency of people who understood that seconds could mean the difference between life and death. My family sat there like passengers on a delayed flight, annoyed by the inconvenience but not particularly invested in the outcome. When the beautiful sound of a steady heartbeat returned to the monitors, when the room filled with the relieved exhales of medical professionals who had just pulled someone back from the edge of death, my mother's first words were, "I hope insurance doesn't charge extra for resuscitation procedures." The second cardiac event came during hour 5, and this time Natalie actually left the room to take a phone call about some influencer collaboration opportunity. My father remained by the window, not watching the medical team work to restart his daughter's heart, but staring out at the parking lot like he was planning his route home to catch the end of whatever game was playing on television. By the third heart failure at hour 6, they had clearly reached their limit of what they considered reasonable family obligation. My heart flatlined for almost 3 full minutes while Dr. Foster and her team performed what could only be described as a medical miracle to bring me back to life. The sound of that endless, piercing alarm should have terrified any parent beyond rational thought. Instead, it seemed to finally provide them with the permission they'd been waiting for to prioritize their own comfort over my survival. "You know what?" my father announced as my heartbeat stabilized yet again, "I'm starving. We've been here all morning and there's nothing we can actually do to help anyway. Let's grab some lunch." My mother was already gathering her purse like she'd been waiting for someone else to suggest abandoning me. Perfect timing. I saw a lovely Mediterranean place on the way in. "We can be back in an hour or 2. Natalie was practically sprinting toward the door, phone already pressed to her ear. Thank God, I was literally dying of boredom. Plus, the lighting in here is terrible for content creation. And just like that, they left. While I lay there connected to machines that were keeping me alive, while Dr. Foster looked at them with absolute horror, while the nursing staff whispered among themselves about the worst family behavior they'd witnessed in their careers, my blood relatives walked out of Riverside Medical Center to enjoy a leisurely lunch and argue about whether to order wine with their meal. I was alone, truly and completely alone, dying in a trauma bay while my family debated appetizers at some trendy restaurant 20 minutes away. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong anywhere near a hospital, a sound that made the windows rattle and brought every staff member to a standstill. The thunderous, rhythmic beating of helicopter blades growing closer and closer until it seemed like the aircraft was about to land directly on the hospital roof. And through the window of Trauma Bay 7, I saw salvation descending from the storm clouds. The next 2 hours at Riverside Medical Center revealed the true character of the people I had called family my entire life. While my body fought a war against whatever was systematically destroying my immune system, the Ashford family treated my medical emergency like an inconvenient disruption to their carefully planned holiday weekend. My mother, Diane, had arrived at the hospital in her tennis outfit, fresh from her morning match at the country club. She'd made no effort to change clothes, as if acknowledging the severity of my condition would somehow make it more real or more expensive. Instead, she sat in that plastic chair conducting what appeared to be damage control phone calls with their insurance company, their financial advisor, and anyone else who might help minimize the cost of keeping their daughter alive. No, we specifically declined the premium emergency coverage because Cassandra has always been perfectly healthy, I heard her whisper into her phone, shooting annoyed glances at my monitors every time they beeped with another alarming reading. This is obviously some kind of freak accident. We shouldn't be penalized for something completely unforeseeable. My father, Gregory, had transformed the family medical crisis into a networking opportunity. He spent most of his time in the hallway, making business calls about a deal he was trying to close before the holiday weekend ended. When he did venture into my room, it was to ask Dr. Foster questions that had nothing to do with my health and everything to do with liability and cost management. "Doctor, if my daughter's condition is related to something she ate at our barbecue, would that impact our homeowner's insurance coverage?" he asked during one of her visits to check my vitals. "And hypothetically, if we needed to transfer her to a different facility for financial reasons, how stable would she need to be for transport?" Dr. Foster had stared at him like he'd asked her to perform surgery with a butter knife. "Mr. Ashford, your daughter has experienced 3 cardiac arrests in the past 6 hours. The only consideration right now should be providing her with the best possible medical care, regardless of cost." Of course, my father had replied with the dismissive tone of someone humoring a child. I'm just trying to understand our options from a practical standpoint. But it was Natalie who truly revealed the depths of our family's dysfunction. She had turned my life or death struggle into content for her social media empire, creating what she called a raw, authentic hospital experience for her followers. She live-streamed from different corners of my room, always careful to angle her phone so that she appeared to be the suffering, devoted sister while I remained mostly out of frame. Hey beautiful souls, Natalie here coming to you live from a really challenging family situation, she said into her phone while I fought for each breath just feet away. Today is really testing my gratitude practice and my ability to stay positive during difficult times. I want to share this journey with you because I think it's important to show that influencers are real people with real family struggles too. She had created a whole narrative around my medical emergency that positioned her as the heroic family member carrying an impossible emotional burden. Her captions talked about the heavy energy in hospitals and how she was using meditation and crystal healing to send positive vibes to her unnamed family member who was going through a health challenge. The comments from her followers were even more disturbing than her exploitation of my condition. They praised her strength, her vulnerability, her ability to find light in dark situations. Several suggested she start a GoFundMe for the family's medical expenses, which Natalie screenshotted and saved for later consideration. The universe is really testing our family's financial abundance right now, she told her phone during one particularly grotesque live stream. But I believe that when we approach challenges with love and light, the universe provides exactly what we need. I'm thinking about launching a special prayer circle subscription for my followers who want to support us energetically during this time. What made their behavior even more appalling was how they performed concern whenever medical staff were present, then immediately returned to their self-centered activities the moment they were alone with me. When Dr. Foster or the nurses came in to check on my condition, my mother would suddenly appear at my bedside, stroking my hand and asking detailed questions about my care. My father would put away his phone and stand protectively near my monitors, nodding seriously at medical updates. Natalie would stop live streaming and assume the pose of a worried sister, complete with appropriately concerned facial expressions. The moment the medical staff left, they'd return to their previous activities as if someone had flipped a switch. My mother would resume her insurance phone calls, my father would step back into the hallway to continue his business negotiations, and Natalie would pull out her phone to update her followers on the latest developments in her hospital vigil content series. Their performance of family devotion was so convincing that several nurses commented on how wonderful it was to see such a caring, involved family during a medical crisis. If only they knew that their praise was being directed at people who were calculating the cost-benefit analysis of my survival between moments of staged grief. The breaking point came when Dr. Foster pulled my family aside for what she called a serious conversation about Cassandra's condition and treatment options. I could hear every word from my bed, though they spoke in the hallway just outside my room. I need you to understand that your daughter's condition is extremely critical, Dr. Foster said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had delivered devastating news to families before. We're seeing organ systems beginning to fail in sequence. Her kidneys are showing signs of distress, her liver function is declining, and her cardiovascular system is increasingly unstable. The next 12 hours will be crucial. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath, but not from emotional distress. Dr. Foster, what kind of treatments are we looking at? I need to understand the financial implications before we commit to anything extensive. Mrs. Ashford, I'm talking about your daughter's life. We may need to consider dialysis, possibly surgical intervention, definitely extended intensive care monitoring. These aren't financial decisions, they're medical necessities. My father's voice cut through Dr. Foster's explanation with the cold precision of someone negotiating a business contract. Doctor, we appreciate your medical expertise, but we also need to be realistic about our family's resources. If Cassandra's condition is as serious as you're suggesting, we need to consider quality of life issues and the potential for meaningful recovery. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ventilation system cycling in the background. Mr. Ashford, Dr. Foster said slowly, and I could hear the incredulous anger building in her voice. Are you asking me about discontinuing life-saving treatment for your daughter because of cost concerns? We're asking about all our options, my mother interjected quickly. Cassandra wouldn't want to be a burden on the family, financially or emotionally. She's always been very practical about these things. That's when I realized with crystalline clarity that my family wasn't just failing to support me during my medical crisis. They were actively hoping I wouldn't survive it. My death would solve their immediate financial concerns, eliminate what they clearly viewed as an ongoing burden, and provide them with the social sympathy that comes with being the grieving relatives of someone who died tragically young. They had already moved past hoping for my recovery to calculating the benefits of my demise. As Dr. Foster returned to my room, her face pale with shock at what she'd just heard, I understood that I was facing something far more dangerous than whatever was attacking my body. I was facing a family that had already written my obituary and was simply waiting for my biology to catch up with their financial planning. The hours that followed Dr. Foster's devastating medical briefing transformed what had already been a nightmarish situation into something that defied comprehension. As my condition deteriorated with frightening speed, my family's response became increasingly detached from any recognizable form of human compassion or basic parental instinct. My kidneys began shutting down around hour 8, sending alarms screaming through the trauma bay as my body struggled to process the toxins that were overwhelming my system. The dialysis machine that Dr. Foster had mentioned wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was becoming a necessity as my blood chemistry spiraled toward levels that would cause permanent organ damage if left untreated. Dr. Foster had called in Dr. Patricia Wells, the hospital's leading nephrologist, who took one look at my lab results and immediately began preparing for emergency dialysis. The two physicians worked with the kind of focused intensity that spoke to the gravity of my situation, but their medical urgency seemed to have the opposite effect on my family. Rather than becoming more concerned as my condition worsened, the Ashfords appeared to become more comfortable with the idea that this crisis would resolve itself through my death rather than my recovery. They had moved past the shock of my initial collapse and settled into what could only be described as anticipatory grief, except their grief seemed focused more on the inconvenience I was causing than the life they were about to lose. My mother had established herself as the family's designated crisis manager, but her management style involved minimizing the severity of my condition to anyone who would listen. When Dr. Wells explained the kidney failure and the need for immediate dialysis, my mother responded by questioning whether such aggressive treatment was really necessary for someone with my delicate constitution. Dr. Wells, my mother said with the tone of someone correcting a service worker, Cassandra has always had health issues. She's been fragile since childhood, frequent stomach problems, fatigue, sensitivity to medications. Are we sure we're not overreacting to what might be her body's normal response to stress? Dr. Wells stared at my mother like she'd just suggested treating cancer with essential oils. Mrs. Ashford, your daughter is in acute renal failure. This isn't a stress response or a manifestation of constitutional delicacy. Without immediate intervention, she will die. But even this stark medical reality couldn't penetrate my mother's determination to reframe my crisis as something manageable and temporary. She had begun describing my condition to relatives and family friends as Cassandra's latest episode, as if my multiple cardiac arrests and organ failure were comparable to a migraine headache or a bout of anxiety. My father, meanwhile, had transformed the ICU waiting area into his temporary office. He had commandeered a corner table and spread out legal documents, financial statements, and what appeared to be insurance paperwork. When concerned family friends called to check on my condition, they found themselves discussing not my medical status but the Ashford family's financial exposure and their strategies for minimizing costs. "We're exploring all our options," became his standard response to inquiries about my health. Obviously we want what's best for Cassandra, but we also have to be realistic about what's practical for the family long term. His conversations had taken on an increasingly clinical tone, as if he were managing a business crisis rather than his daughter's fight for survival. I overheard him explaining to someone on the phone that they were evaluating the cost-effectiveness of various treatment protocols and considering the family's overall financial health in our decision-making process. The most disturbing aspect of his behavior was how he had begun researching the legal implications of discontinuing treatment. During my brief moments of consciousness, I could see him hunched over his laptop, scrolling through websites about medical power of attorney, advance directives, and what he euphemistically called end-of-life planning. Natalie had escalated her social media exploitation to levels that would have been comedic if they weren't so grotesque. She had branded my medical emergency as her Dark Night of the Soul content series, positioning herself as a spiritual warrior battling negative energy while supporting her family through their time of trial. Her live streams from the hospital had evolved into full production efforts. She had brought ring lights, multiple phones for different camera angles, and what appeared to be a complete makeup kit. She was conducting guided meditation sessions from the ICU waiting room, leading her followers through breathing exercises while I struggled to breathe just yards away. Beautiful souls, I'm coming to you live from what has honestly been the most challenging spiritual test of my life, she said into her primary camera while adjusting her secondary phone to capture what she called her raw, authentic energy. The universe is asking me to hold space for my family while maintaining my own energetic boundaries, and I want to share this journey with you because I think we all struggle with toxic family dynamics. She had begun selling what she called crisis survival kits to her followers, collections of crystals, essential oils, and affirmation cards that she claimed had been energetically charged in the hospital to carry the healing vibrations of her family's experience. The kits were priced at $89.99 and came with a personalized video message from Natalie about transforming trauma into triumph. Her followers were eating it up. The comment sections of her posts were filled with praise for her strength, her vulnerability, her ability to find growth opportunities in the midst of family crisis. Several had suggested that she write a book about her hospital experience, and Natalie had already begun outlining chapters for what she planned to call Lighting the Way, a young woman's guide to family emergency spiritual survival. But it was the conversations I overheard between my family members that revealed the true depths of their moral bankruptcy. During one of their whispered conferences in the hallway, thinking I was unconscious, they discussed my situation with the casual callousness of people planning a vacation. "How long do you think this is going to drag on?" my father asked, checking his watch like he was timing a business presentation. "Dr. Foster said the next 12 hours would be crucial," my mother replied, scrolling through her phone. "But honestly, even if she stabilizes, what kind of life is she going to have? Kidney damage, possible brain damage from the cardiac events, massive medical debt that will follow her for years." Natalie looked up from editing her latest Instagram post. "Plus, think about the emotional trauma we're all going through. Even if Cassandra recovers physically, our family dynamic is going to be forever changed by this experience. That's not fair to any of us." They had moved seamlessly from hoping for my recovery to accepting my death to actually anticipating it as the most convenient resolution to their current crisis. My survival had become not just financially burdensome but emotionally inconvenient, and they were beginning to frame my potential death as a mercy for everyone involved, especially themselves. The breaking point came when Dr. Wells attempted to explain the dialysis procedure and get consent for the treatment. Instead of asking about risks, recovery time, or long-term prognosis, my family's questions focused entirely on cost, duration, and what they kept referring to as quality of life considerations. "Dr. Wells," my mother said with the patience of someone explaining something to a child, "we appreciate everything you're trying to do, but we need to consider whether this level of intervention is really in Cassandra's best interest. She's always valued independence and dignity. Would she really want to be kept alive on machines?" Dr. Wells looked at my family with undisguised horror. "Mrs. Ashford, your daughter is 28 years old with no prior kidney disease. With proper treatment, she has an excellent chance of full recovery. We're not talking about end-stage terminal illness, we're talking about acute, potentially reversible organ failure." But my family had already made their decision. They weren't interested in my chances of recovery because recovery would mean ongoing medical expenses, continued family obligations, and the disruption of whatever financial arrangements they had planned in my absence. As the machines around my bed continued their urgent warnings and Dr. Wells prepared for emergency dialysis, I realized that I was fighting two battles simultaneously. One was against whatever was systematically destroying my body, and the other was against the people who were supposed to be fighting alongside me but had instead chosen to become spectators at my funeral. The most terrifying realization was that even if I survived the medical crisis, I would never be safe as long as my recovery depended on people who had already calculated the benefits of my death. The 10th hour at Riverside Medical Center marked the moment when my family's facade of concern finally crumbled completely, revealing the cold calculation that had been driving their behavior since the moment I'd collapsed at our Labor Day barbecue. What happened next would haunt me for the rest of my life, not because of the medical trauma my body endured, but because of the deliberate cruelty inflicted by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Dr. Wells had successfully initiated emergency dialysis, and for a brief period, my vital signs showed encouraging improvement. My blood chemistry began stabilizing, the dangerous toxin levels started declining, and the monitors around my bed produced the steady rhythms that indicated my kidneys were responding to the artificial filtration. For approximately 45 minutes, it appeared that aggressive medical intervention might actually save my life. That improvement, rather than bringing relief to my family, seemed to trigger something approaching panic in their carefully constructed narrative of inevitable tragedy. They had spent hours preparing themselves, and apparently others, for my death, and my stubborn refusal to die on schedule was creating complications in their planning that went far beyond medical bills. During those crucial minutes when my condition stabilized, I witnessed a conversation between my parents that revealed the true scope of their betrayal. They had stepped into the hallway, thinking I was sedated beyond awareness, but the dialysis procedure required me to remain conscious, and their voices carried clearly through the thin hospital walls. "This is becoming a real problem," my father said, his voice tight with frustration rather than relief at my medical improvement. "I already told Marcus that we'd be able to settle the estate issues by the end of the week. Now what am I supposed to tell him?" My mother's response sent ice through my veins despite the warm dialysis fluid flowing through my system. "Gregory, calm down. The doctors said this improvement might just be temporary. Dr. Foster mentioned that patients often have periods of stabilization before the final decline. We just need to be patient." "Patient," my father's voice rose enough that I could hear every word with crystal clarity. "Diane, I've already signed the preliminary paperwork with the funeral home. I've notified the insurance companies about the pending death claim. I've started the probate process based on medical projections that she wouldn't survive the night." The casual efficiency with which they had begun planning my funeral while I fought for my life was staggering, but what came next revealed depths of betrayal that I hadn't imagined possible. "Well, maybe we need to consider other options," my mother said in the tone of someone solving a logistics problem. "Dr. Foster mentioned that patients in Cassandra's condition are extremely vulnerable to complications. Infections, adverse reactions to medications, unexpected cardiac events. These things happen all the time in intensive care situations." My father was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him processing the implications of my mother's suggestion. "Are you saying what I think you're saying, Diane?" "I'm saying that sometimes families have to make difficult decisions about continuing aggressive treatment when the outlook is poor and the financial burden becomes overwhelming. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let nature take its course rather than prolonging suffering." They weren't just hoping for my death anymore. They were discussing how to ensure it happened, whether through medical neglect, discontinued treatment, or what my mother euphemistically called letting nature take its course. My own parents were plotting my murder, and they were doing it with the casual efficiency of people planning a dinner party. The conversation that followed revealed that their plans extended far beyond my immediate demise. They had already contacted my husband Ezra's business associates, positioning themselves as the grieving family who would need support and guidance through the complex process of managing my estate and business interests. They had researched the legal implications of spousal inheritance when the deceased had complicated business holdings, and they had begun cultivating relationships with financial advisors who specialized in what they called sudden wealth management for surviving spouses. "Ezra's going to be devastated," my mother said, but her tone suggested she viewed his grief as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. "Men like him don't handle emotional trauma well. He's going to need family support, people he can trust to help him make good decisions during his mourning period." My father's response revealed the full scope of their manipulation. I already spoke with his business manager about setting up a family trust that would provide us with advisory positions in his investment decisions. Temporarily, of course, just until he's emotionally stable enough to handle everything on his own. They had orchestrated not just my death, but the systematic exploitation of my husband's grief to gain access to his wealth. They were planning to use my funeral as a networking opportunity, positioning themselves as the caring family members who could help a devastated widower navigate his sudden change in circumstances. Natalie's voice joined the conversation, and I realized she had been listening to their entire exchange. "What about the insurance investigations? Won't they ask questions if Cassandra dies right after we discontinue treatment?" "That's why timing is so important," my mother explained with the patience of someone teaching a child. If she dies during what appears to be a natural decline following multiple cardiac events and organ failure, it looks like medical tragedy, not family decision-making. The key is making sure the doctors recommend comfort care rather than continued aggressive intervention. They were planning to manipulate medical professionals into unknowingly participating in my murder by creating conditions that would make my death appear to be a natural progression of my medical crisis rather than the result of deliberately discontinued treatment. The sophistication of their plan was breathtaking in its callousness. They had researched medical protocols, legal implications, insurance requirements, and estate planning with the thoroughness of people launching a major business venture. My death wasn't just financially convenient, it was a carefully orchestrated opportunity for them to access wealth and social status that had previously been beyond their reach. But the most devastating betrayal came when I heard Natalie describe how she planned to monetize my death through her social media platform. She had already outlined a content series about grief, loss, and finding meaning in tragedy that would launch immediately following my funeral. She had partnerships lined up with meditation apps, grief counseling services, and life insurance companies who wanted to sponsor her content about protecting your family through life's unexpected challenges. My followers are already so invested in this journey, she explained to our parents with genuine excitement in her voice. The engagement rates on my hospital content are through the roof. When Cassandra actually dies, I'll be able to leverage that emotional connection into some really significant brand partnerships. She had calculated that my death would be worth approximately 6 figures in sponsored content over the following year, not including the book deal she was confident she could negotiate about her experience, losing a sister while finding herself spiritually. As I lay there listening to my family plan my murder and my post-mortem exploitation, I experienced something that went beyond betrayal or heartbreak. I felt a kind of cosmic loneliness that comes from realizing that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally have instead reduced your life to a line item in their financial planning. The machines around my bed continued their steady rhythm, indicating that the dialysis was working and my condition was stabilizing, but I knew that medical improvement wouldn't save me from the people who were supposed to be protecting me. They had already moved past hoping for my death to actively planning it, and they possessed the means, opportunity, and apparent moral flexibility to ensure their plan succeeded. That's when the first thunderclap shook the windows of Riverside Medical Center, announcing the arrival of a storm that would change everything. But at that moment, lying in my hospital bed while my family planned my funeral, I had no idea that salvation was about to descend from the clouds in the form of rotor blades and righteous fury. The storm approaching wasn't just meteorological, it was personal, and it was about to remind my family that some people fight back when you try to erase them from existence. The sound that shattered the relative quiet of Riverside Medical Center at 11:47 p.m. defied every expectation of what belonged in a hospital environment. It started as a distant rumble, like thunder rolling across the valley, but quickly intensified into the unmistakable rhythmic percussion of helicopter rotors cutting through the storm clouds that had been gathering over Willowbrook Heights throughout the evening. My family's hushed conversation about discontinuing my treatment came to an abrupt halt as the windows of the ICU began vibrating with increasing intensity. The overhead lights swayed slightly, and somewhere in the distance, car alarms began wailing as the downdraft from massive rotor blades disturbed the hospital parking lot with hurricane-force winds. Dr. Foster rushed into my room, her face a mixture of confusion and concern as she checked the monitors to ensure the vibrations weren't affecting my dialysis equipment. "What in the world is that noise?" she asked one of the nurses, who was peering out the window with wide eyes. "Dr. Foster, you need to see this," the nurse called out, her voice barely audible over the increasing roar. "There's a helicopter landing in our parking lot. A big one." Through my partially sedated haze, I could hear my family's panicked voices as they rushed back into my room, their faces pale with confusion and what looked suspiciously like fear. They had been so focused on their plans for my demise that the possibility of outside intervention seemed to catch them completely off guard. "Who would be landing a helicopter here at midnight?" my mother asked, her voice tight with anxiety that had nothing to do with concern for my welfare and everything to do with worry about their carefully orchestrated timeline being disrupted. My father was already pulling out his phone, frantically typing what appeared to be text messages. "Maybe it's a medical transport," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe they're transferring another patient." Natalie had pressed herself against the window, phone in hand, filming the spectacle outside. "Oh my God, you guys, this is incredible content," she said, momentarily forgetting that her sister was dying just feet away. The production value of this moment is insane. My followers are going to lose their minds. But as the helicopter settled into the parking lot with military precision, its gold and black livery became visible even through the storm-darkened night. The aircraft wasn't a medical transport or emergency services vehicle. It was a private luxury helicopter bearing markings that made my heart race despite the sedatives flowing through my system. The letters, Blackstone Industries, were emblazoned across the fuselage in elegant script, and below that, the distinctive Phoenix logo that had become synonymous with one of the most successful tech empires on the East Coast. My husband's company logo, visible even through the rain and darkness, announcing that Ezra Blackstone had arrived to reclaim his wife. The rotor wash from the massive aircraft was sending debris flying across the parking lot, rocking cars and forcing anyone outside to take shelter. The helicopter was enormous, not the sleek corporate transport that most wealthy executives use for quick trips, but the kind of heavy-lift aircraft typically reserved for offshore oil rigs or military operations. It was a statement of power that couldn't be ignored, misunderstood, or minimized. My family's reaction to seeing that logo was immediate and visceral. My father's face went ashen, and he began frantically scrolling through his phone, likely trying to figure out how Ezra could possibly know about my condition. My mother sat down heavily in the plastic chair, her hands trembling as she realized that their carefully planned timeline for my death had just been catastrophically disrupted. "How does he know?" my father whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. We specifically agreed not to contact him until after the holiday weekend. He's supposed to be in Singapore closing the Patterson deal. Natalie had stopped filming and was staring at the helicopter with genuine fear in her eyes. "Wait, if Uncle Ezra is here, does that mean he knows about our conversation? About what we've been discussing?" The implications of Ezra's arrival were clearly cascading through their minds with increasing alarm. They had counted on having several more hours, possibly days, to implement their plan for discontinuing my treatment and managing my death in a way that would appear natural and inevitable. The presence of my husband, particularly a husband with virtually unlimited resources and a reputation for ruthless efficiency in business, represented a complete disruption of their carefully orchestrated scheme. Dr. Foster was receiving rapid-fire updates through her radio as hospital security coordinated with whoever was arriving via helicopter. "Medical team, we have an incoming VIP requesting immediate access to Trauma Bay 7, came the crackling voice through her communication device. "Security clearance has been verified through channels I've never seen before. Apparently, this is the patient's husband." The doctor looked at my family with growing suspicion. I was under the impression that Mrs. Blackstone's husband was traveling internationally and hadn't been notified of her condition. "You specifically told me that family notification was being handled internally and that outside contacts should be delayed until after the critical period." My mother's face flushed deep red as she scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't reveal their true motives. "Well, someone must have reached out to him despite our family agreement. We wanted to spare him the worry while he was handling important business overseas. We thought it would be kinder to wait until we had more definitive information about Cassandra's prognosis." Dr. Foster's expression shifted from confusion to barely concealed anger. "Mrs. Ashford, your daughter has experienced multiple cardiac arrests and kidney failure. Her husband had every right to be notified immediately, regardless of your family's preference for managing information flow." The sound of the helicopter rotors was beginning to wind down, but it was being replaced by new sounds: car doors slamming, multiple footsteps moving with military precision, and voices coordinating what sounded like a tactical operation rather than a hospital visit. Whatever was happening outside wasn't just a concerned husband arriving to check on his wife. It was the deployment of resources that suggested Ezra had mobilized his entire crisis management infrastructure. My father had moved to the window and was watching the activity in the parking lot with increasing alarm. "There are at least 6 vehicles down there now," he reported to my mother in a voice tight with panic. "Black SUVs, what looks like a mobile command center, and people who definitely aren't hospital staff. This isn't just a family visit." Natalie had abandoned any pretense of filming content and was now frantically deleting posts from her social media accounts. "Oh God, what if he's seen my live streams? What if he knows I've been posting about this whole situation? He's going to sue me into oblivion for exploiting family medical information." The reality was beginning to dawn on all three of them that their plans for managing my medical crisis, and my death, had just collided with a force they were completely unprepared to handle. Ezra wasn't just wealthy, he was strategically intelligent, commanded vast resources, and had built his fortune by identifying problems and systematically destroying them. As the elevator chimed softly in the distance, announcing arrivals to the ICU floor, my family looked like deer caught in headlights, suddenly understanding that their cozy family conspiracy had just attracted the attention of someone who had the means and motivation to investigate every detail of their behavior over the past 10 hours. The footsteps in the hallway were approaching fast, accompanied by voices coordinating security protocols and medical consultations. Dr. Foster was receiving updates through multiple communication channels, apparently from hospital administration, security, and what sounded like federal agencies coordinating the sudden arrival of a high-profile patient's family. "Mrs. Ashford," Dr. Foster said quietly, her voice carrying a warning that my family was too panicked to fully process, "I think you should prepare yourselves for some very direct questions about your family's decision-making process tonight. It appears that Mr. Blackstone has brought his own medical team for consultation, along with what I'm told is a comprehensive crisis management staff." My family's carefully constructed narrative about my inevitable decline and their reluctant acceptance of medical reality was about to face scrutiny from people who specialized in uncovering truth and eliminating threats. The storm outside was just beginning, but the real tempest was about to walk through my hospital room door. The hospital room door opened with the controlled force of someone accustomed to entering spaces where their presence would fundamentally alter every dynamic at play. Ezra Blackstone stepped into Trauma Bay 7 like a force of nature contained within an impeccably tailored storm coat, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person in the room despite the late hour and chaotic circumstances. Even through my medication-induced haze, I could see that my husband hadn't simply rushed to the hospital in a panic. This was a coordinated response that spoke to resources most people couldn't even imagine, let alone deploy. Behind him came a small army of professionals moving with the synchronized efficiency of a presidential security detail, medical specialists carrying equipment I didn't recognize, what appeared to be a legal team with briefcases and tablets, and several individuals whose bearing suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. Dr. Foster stepped forward immediately, her professional composure intact despite the unprecedented nature of this midnight arrival. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm Dr. Amanda Foster, your wife's attending physician. We spoke briefly on the phone during your flight." Ezra's eyes never left my face as he approached the bed, his hand finding mine with the gentle precision of someone who understood exactly how fragile I was at that moment. "Doctor, thank you for keeping her alive until I could get here. I need you to give me a complete medical briefing, everything that's happened, everything you've done, and everything you need to do next." The contrast between his controlled intensity and my family's barely concealed panic was stark. While the Ashfords huddled near the window looking like criminals who just heard police sirens, Ezra moved through the room with the calm authority of someone who owned every space he entered. "Sir, your wife has experienced severe anaphylactic shock with complications that led to multiple cardiac events and acute renal failure," Dr. Foster began, but Ezra raised a hand to stop her. "Dr. Chen," he called to one of the specialists who had accompanied him, "please coordinate with Dr. Foster on the complete medical record review. I want independent analysis of every treatment decision made in the past 12 hours. He turned back to Dr. Foster with an expression that was polite but absolutely unyielding. "Doctor, I've brought Dr. Sarah Chen from Johns Hopkins Nephrology, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez from Mount Sinai Cardiology, and Dr. Lisa Park from Stanford Toxicology. They'll be consulting on my wife's case immediately." My mother attempted to insert herself into the medical discussion with the kind of presumptuous authority she'd been wielding all day. "Ezra, dear, I think you should know that we've been here with Cassandra since this morning, working closely with the medical team to make the best decisions for her care. The doctors have been wonderful, but they've explained that her condition is quite serious and the prognosis is uncertain." Ezra's gaze shifted to my mother with the kind of focused attention that had made hostile corporate boards surrender billion-dollar negotiations. "Mrs. Ashford, I'll address family matters after I've ensured my wife is receiving optimal medical care. Right now, my priority is understanding how someone with no known allergies or health issues ended up in multi-organ failure." Dr. Chen had already begun reviewing my chart alongside Dr. Foster, asking detailed questions about the timeline of my symptoms, the treatments administered, and the diagnostic tests performed. Dr. Rodriguez was examining the cardiac monitoring equipment with the kind of intense focus that suggested he was seeing patterns that concerned him. But it was Dr. Park, the toxicologist, whose questions immediately changed the trajectory of the entire conversation. "Dr. Foster, I'm reviewing the blood work from Mrs. Blackstone's admission. The presentation of symptoms, the severe allergic response followed by cardiac instability and kidney involvement, this pattern suggests possible toxic exposure rather than simple anaphylaxis." My family's reaction to the word toxic was immediate and telling. My father moved closer to the door, my mother's face went completely white, and Natalie actually dropped her phone, the device clattering against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Dr. Foster pulled up additional test results on her tablet. "We did run standard toxicology screens, but they came back within normal ranges for common substances." "Standard panels won't catch everything," Dr. Park replied, already preparing equipment I hadn't seen before. "I'd like to run extended screens for exotic compounds, industrial chemicals, and pharmaceutical combinations that could produce this symptom profile. With your permission, Mr. Blackstone, I'll need fresh samples for comprehensive analysis." Ezra's voice remained calm, but I could see his jaw tighten imperceptibly. "Dr. Park, you have my complete authorization to test for anything you consider relevant. Cost is not a factor, and I want the most comprehensive analysis available." During this medical consultation, I noticed that several of the non-medical personnel who had arrived with Ezra were positioning themselves strategically around the room. One had taken a position near my family, another was by the door, and a third was setting up what appeared to be recording equipment. This wasn't just a medical response, it was an investigation. My father made the mistake of trying to assert some kind of authority over the situation. "Now see here, Ezra, I appreciate your concern, but we are Cassandra's family, and we've been managing this crisis all day. These doctors you've brought in don't have the full context of her medical history or the discussions we've had with the attending physician about realistic treatment options." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Ezra turned his full attention to my father for the first time since entering. "Mr. Ashford, help me understand something. My wife collapsed at approximately 3 p.m. during your family barbecue. It's now nearly midnight. In 9 hours, no one contacted her husband. Can you explain the reasoning behind that decision?" My mother jumped in quickly, her voice taking on that manipulative sweetness she used when trying to control narratives. "Ezra, sweetheart, we know how hard you've been working on that Singapore acquisition. Cassandra specifically asked us not to worry you until we knew more about her condition. She didn't want to disrupt your important business negotiations for what might have been a minor allergic reaction. I wanted to scream that this was a complete fabrication, but the dialysis procedure and my weakened condition made speech nearly impossible." However, Ezra's expression suggested he was already several steps ahead of my family's clumsy attempt at deception. "Mrs. Ashford, that's interesting," Ezra said with the tone of someone who had just identified a critical flaw in a business proposal. "Because I have the complete phone records from Cassandra's device, which my security team retrieved from your house an hour ago. The last call she made was to her assistant at 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the 911 call. She didn't speak to anyone about not contacting me." The silence that followed was deafening. My family had just been caught in their first provable lie, and Ezra had demonstrated that he possessed resources and authority they hadn't anticipated. The phone records were just the beginning. I could see that he had already deployed a comprehensive investigation that would uncover every detail of their behavior. One of the legal professionals stepped forward and handed Ezra a tablet displaying what appeared to be official documents. "Mr. Blackstone, hospital administration has provided the complete record of family interactions with medical staff, including documented conversations about treatment decisions and financial considerations." Dr. Foster shifted uncomfortably as she realized that private family discussions were apparently being reviewed by legal professionals with security clearances she couldn't begin to understand. Ezra examined the documents with the same focused intensity he brought to analyzing corporate acquisitions. "Dr. Foster, according to these records, Mrs. Blackstone's family specifically discussed discontinuing aggressive treatment due to cost considerations and quality of life concerns. They also delayed notification of next of kin and questioned whether resuscitation efforts were financially justified. My family was beginning to understand that their casual conversations had been documented, recorded, and analyzed by professionals who specialized in uncovering deception. The scope of Ezra's response went far beyond a worried husband arriving at a hospital. This was a full-scale investigation into potential criminal behavior. Dr. Park looked up from her preliminary analysis with an expression that sent chills through the room. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm seeing some very unusual markers in these blood samples. I need to run more specific tests, but the preliminary findings suggest your wife may have been exposed to compounds that don't occur naturally in food or environmental sources." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything in its path. My family's carefully planned narrative about my inevitable decline was beginning to crumble under the weight of scientific evidence and professional investigation. Ezra's voice remained controlled, but I could see the storm building behind his eyes. "Dr. Park, how long until we have definitive results? Give me 4 hours for the complete panel. You have whatever resources you need." "And doctor?" Ezra's voice carried the quiet authority that had built a business empire. "I want to know exactly what my wife was exposed to, when she was exposed to it, and how." Dr. Park's preliminary findings had transformed the atmosphere in Trauma Bay 7 from a medical emergency into something resembling a crime scene investigation. The toxicology results that began emerging over the next hour painted a picture so disturbing that even the experienced medical professionals in the room struggled to maintain their clinical composure. "Mr. Blackstone," Dr. Park said, her voice carefully controlled as she reviewed the data streaming from her advanced analysis equipment, "I need to show you something that's going to be very difficult to hear. Your wife's blood contains traces of at least 4 different compounds that have no business being in any human body." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She activated a large display screen that one of Ezra's technical team had set up, showing molecular structures and concentration levels that meant nothing to me but clearly alarmed the medical professionals in the room. "We're looking at a sophisticated combination of immunosuppressants, antihistamine blockers, and what appears to be a gradual sensitization protocol using modified protein compounds." Dr. Chen leaned forward to examine the data more closely. "Dr. Park, this isn't accidental exposure. This is a systematic poisoning regimen that would require significant pharmaceutical knowledge to design and implement." My family's reaction to this revelation was immediate and telling. My father moved toward the door with obvious intent to leave, my mother began frantically searching through her purse for something, and Natalie was staring at her phone with the kind of panic that suggested she was deleting evidence in real time. Ezra noticed their behavior immediately. "Security," he said quietly, and 2 of his personnel smoothly positioned themselves between my family and the exit. "I think everyone should remain here while we fully understand what's happened to my wife." Dr. Park continued her analysis with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to testifying in criminal proceedings. "The pattern of compounds suggests a timeline of approximately 6 to 8 weeks of gradual exposure, with a massive triggering dose administered within the past 24 hours. Someone with access to Mrs. Blackstone's food or beverages has been systematically preparing her body for exactly the kind of catastrophic allergic response we witnessed today." The implications of her findings were staggering. This wasn't a sudden medical emergency or an unexpected allergic reaction. Someone had been poisoning me for months, carefully weakening my immune system and preparing my body to react catastrophically to a final triggering exposure. Dr. Rodriguez had been monitoring my cardiac data throughout this discussion, and his findings added another layer of horror to the emerging picture. "Mr. Blackstone, the pattern of your wife's cardiac events is consistent with chemically induced arrhythmia. The compounds Dr. Park identified would explain why standard resuscitation protocols were less effective than expected." Ezra's voice remained calm, but I could see his hands trembling slightly as the full scope of what had been done to me became clear. "Dr. Park, would this type of poisoning protocol require professional medical knowledge to implement safely?" "Absolutely. The precision required to achieve this level of immune suppression without causing obvious symptoms until the triggering event would require extensive pharmacological expertise. This isn't something someone could research online or improvise. We're looking at professional-grade toxicology knowledge." My mother's nursing background suddenly took on sinister new meaning. Her years of experience in cardiac care, her ongoing relationships with pharmaceutical professionals, her detailed knowledge of drug interactions, all of it now appeared in a completely different light. One of Ezra's legal team stepped forward with documents that had apparently been prepared during the flight from Singapore. "Mr. Blackstone, we've conducted preliminary research into Mrs. Blackstone's family members' professional backgrounds and recent financial activities. There are several concerning patterns that warrant immediate investigation." The lawyer activated another display showing what appeared to be financial records, professional licenses, and communication logs that painted a picture of extensive preparation for something far beyond normal family emergency planning. Mrs. Diane Ashford maintained active nursing licenses until 18 months ago and has ongoing consulting relationships with several pharmaceutical research firms, the lawyer explained. Mr. Gregory Ashford has recently increased life insurance policies on Mrs. Blackstone and has been consulting with estate planning attorneys about accelerated inheritance scenarios. Natalie's social media activity had also been analyzed with surgical precision. Miss Natalie Ashford has been documenting what she describes as her sister's declining health over the past 6 weeks through social media posts that create a narrative of ongoing medical concerns and family worry about Mrs. Blackstone's well-being. The systematic nature of their planning was breathtaking in its scope and callousness. They hadn't simply waited for an opportunity to harm me, they had created that opportunity through months of careful preparation, documentation, and positioning themselves to benefit from my death while appearing to be loving, concerned family members. Dr. Foster had been listening to these revelations with growing horror and what appeared to be professional embarrassment. "Mr. Blackstone, I need to tell you that Mrs. Blackstone's family specifically discouraged aggressive treatment protocols and repeatedly emphasized concerns about quality of life and financial burden. They presented themselves as having extensive medical knowledge and intimate understanding of the patient's wishes. The manipulation had extended beyond the poisoning itself to include managing medical professionals' responses, ensuring that my family's preferences for limiting treatment would appear reasonable and compassionate rather than suspicious." Ezra turned his attention to my family for the first time since the investigation results had begun emerging. His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that had made international corporations restructure entire business models to avoid his displeasure. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford, Miss Ashford," he said, each name pronounced with the precision of someone reading charges in a criminal proceeding. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to explain how my wife came to be systematically poisoned over a period of months, culminating in an almost fatal exposure that occurred at your family gathering." My mother attempted to summon her usual manipulative charm, but her voice shook with obvious fear. "Ezra, I don't understand what these doctors are suggesting. Cassandra has always been delicate, prone to health issues. We've been trying to help her with natural supplements and wellness programs recommended by holistic health professionals." Dr. Park looked up from her analysis with an expression of barely contained disgust. "Mrs. Ashford, the compounds in your daughter's system are not natural supplements. They include synthetic immunosuppressants that are only available through pharmaceutical research channels and require specialized handling and storage." My father made one last attempt to control the narrative. "Dr. Park, we appreciate your expertise, but I think you're jumping to conclusions based on limited data. Our family has been nothing but supportive of Cassandra's health and well-being. The suggestion that we would deliberately harm her is offensive and completely unfounded." That's when Ezra revealed the scope of the investigation he had launched the moment his security team was unable to reach me. "Mr. Ashford, that might be a more convincing argument if my investigators hadn't already searched your home and found a laboratory setup in your basement, along with detailed documentation of compound acquisition, dosing schedules, and what appears to be a timeline for my wife's systematic poisoning." The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound in the room was the steady rhythm of my dialysis machine and the soft beeping of cardiac monitors. My family's carefully constructed facade had just been obliterated by evidence they hadn't realized was being collected. One of the security personnel handed Ezra a tablet displaying photographs that made everyone in the room step back in shock. Images of a sophisticated home laboratory, detailed charts tracking my health and medication responses, and what appeared to be correspondence with professional chemists about acquiring specific compounds for research purposes. Dr. Chen stared at the evidence with professional fascination mixed with horror. "Mr. Blackstone, this represents months of planning and implementation. The level of documentation suggests they were treating your wife's poisoning like a clinical trial." Natalie finally broke down completely, her composure cracking under the weight of evidence that made denial impossible. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she sobbed, her phone finally forgotten as the reality of their situation penetrated her narcissistic bubble. Mom said it would be quick and painless, that Cassandra would just go to sleep and not wake up. She said it was merciful compared to a long, expensive illness. With that single statement, my sister had just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder and revealed that their plan had always been my death, not my recovery or even my suffering, but my complete elimination from their lives. Ezra's expression didn't change, but I could see something cold and implacable settling behind his eyes. Dr. Park, how long until we have the complete analysis of everything they've done to my wife? Another 2 hours for the full report, but I have enough data now to begin antidote protocols if Dr. Foster approves. Begin immediately. Cost is irrelevant, and I want the best possible outcome regardless of experimental status of treatments. He turned back to my family with the kind of focus that had destroyed corporate empires. As for you three, I think it's time we had a more formal discussion about your activities over the past few months. The investigation that unfolded over the next several hours revealed a conspiracy so elaborate and far-reaching that even Ezra's experienced crisis management team struggled to comprehend its full scope. What had initially appeared to be a family's callous response to a medical emergency was actually the culmination of a systematic murder plot that involved multiple accomplices, sophisticated planning, and connections to what could only be described as a professional assassination network. Agent Rebecca Martinez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division arrived at Riverside Medical Center at 4:17 a.m., accompanied by a team of federal investigators who had been monitoring unusual pharmaceutical purchases and suspicious insurance activities across the region for the past 8 months. My family's amateur hour poisoning operation had apparently triggered alerts in multiple federal databases designed to identify patterns of premeditated murder disguised as medical emergencies. Mr. Blackstone, Agent Martinez said as she established a command center in the hospital's conference room, your wife's case is the breakthrough we've been waiting for in what we believe is a much larger criminal enterprise. The compounds found in her system match patterns we've identified in at least 12 other suspicious deaths over the past 2 years. The revelation that my family's attempt to kill me was part of a broader murder network sent shockwaves through everyone present. This wasn't just about inheritance money or family dysfunction. We had stumbled into something that resembled organized crime operating within seemingly respectable communities. Dr. Park's continued analysis had revealed even more disturbing details about the sophistication of the poisoning protocol. Agent Martinez, the compound combinations used on Mrs. Blackstone required access to pharmaceutical research materials that aren't available through normal channels. Someone with high-level industry connections provided these substances, and the dosing regimen follows protocols that suggest professional consultation. Agent Martinez activated a secure tablet displaying a network analysis that looked like something from a terrorism investigation. We've identified Dr. Marcus Thornfield, a former pharmaceutical researcher who lost his license 3 years ago for conducting unauthorized human experiments. Since then, he's been operating what we call a consulting service for families who want to eliminate relatives while maintaining plausible deniability. The name meant nothing to me, but my mother's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. She began hyperventilating, gripping the arms of her chair with white knuckles as she realized that their carefully concealed connection to professional killers was now exposed to federal investigators. Mrs. Ashford, Agent Martinez continued with the methodical precision of someone who had spent months building this case. We have records of 17 phone calls between you and Dr. Thornfield over the past 3 months, along with financial transfers totaling $75,000 for what your bank records describe as medical consultation services. My father attempted to maintain his composure, but his business executive persona was cracking under the weight of federal criminal charges. Agent Martinez, I think there's been some misunderstanding. We consulted with various medical professionals about Cassandra's health concerns, but the suggestion that we participated in any kind of criminal activity is completely unfounded. Agent Martinez smiled with the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from catching sophisticated criminals in obvious lies. Mr. Ashford, that would be more convincing if we hadn't already arrested Dr. Thornfield 6 hours ago at his laboratory facility in Pennsylvania. He's been quite cooperative about describing his consulting arrangements with families like yours. The federal investigation had been running parallel to Ezra's private investigation, and the convergence of their efforts was producing evidence that painted a picture of systematic murder for hire that operated within wealthy families across multiple states. My family hadn't just hired someone to kill me, they had joined a network that specialized in helping families eliminate inconvenient relatives while maintaining their social respectability. Dr. Thornfield's records, Agent Martinez continued, indicate that your family was part of what he called his inheritance acceleration program. Families pay substantial fees for consultation on eliminating relatives who stand between them and significant wealth, with the deaths designed to appear natural and the families positioned as grieving survivors rather than perpetrators. Natalie finally broke completely under the weight of federal scrutiny. Mom told me it was just like helping Cassandra transition peacefully, she sobbed, her social media persona completely shattered. She said Cassandra was going to die anyway from her health problems, and we were just making it easier for everyone. She said rich people do this all the time when family members become burdens. Agent Martinez recorded every word with the satisfaction of someone watching months of investigative work culminate in voluntary confessions. Miss Ashford, can you tell me about the other families your mother mentioned who had used Dr. Thornfield's services? What emerged from Natalie's testimony was a network of wealthy families who had normalized murder as a solution to inheritance disputes, caregiving burdens, and financial inconveniences. My mother had been introduced to this network through her pharmaceutical industry connections, and she had apparently spent months learning from other families who had successfully eliminated relatives using professional consultation. Dr. Thornfield's operation was sophisticated beyond anything law enforcement had previously encountered. He provided not just the technical expertise for poisoning protocols, but complete family coaching on how to behave during medical emergencies, how to interact with medical professionals, and how to position themselves as grieving families rather than criminal conspirators. The most disturbing aspect of this network, Agent Martinez explained to Ezra and me, is how they've normalized murder within communities that consider themselves respectable and moral. Families convince themselves they're providing mercy or preventing suffering, when they're actually committing premeditated murder for financial gain. The investigation had identified connections between Dr. Thornfield's clients and suspicious deaths in Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Virginia. Wealthy families had been systematically murdering relatives and then supporting each other through the grief counseling and estate management process, creating a community of killers who provided each other with emotional and practical support. My mother's phone records revealed extensive communication with other families who had used Dr. Thornfield's services. They had created what appeared to be a support network for difficult family health decisions, but was actually a criminal conspiracy that helped murderers share strategies and normalize their behavior. Mrs. Ashford participated in what they called family transition support groups, Agent Martinez said, displaying communication logs that revealed the scope of the network. These groups shared experiences about managing medical professionals, controlling information flow, and positioning themselves advantageously during estate settlements. Ezra had been listening to these revelations with increasing anger, but his response was typically strategic rather than emotional. Agent Martinez, what's the timeline for prosecuting everyone involved in this network? Dr. Thornfield is cooperating fully in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. We expect to make arrests in at least 15 additional cases over the next month, with your family's case serving as the primary evidence for the broader conspiracy charges. The scope of the investigation was expanding beyond my family's attempt to murder me into a federal racketeering case that would destroy an entire network of families who had normalized killing their relatives for financial gain. My survival hadn't just saved my life, it had exposed a criminal enterprise that had been operating undetected for years. Dr. Park provided the final piece of the investigative puzzle when she completed her analysis of the compounds found in my system. Agent Martinez, the sophistication of this poisoning protocol indicates that Dr. Thornfield has been refining these methods through multiple victims. Mrs. Blackstone's case represents the most advanced version of their murder technique. The implication was chilling. I had been chosen not just as a victim, but as a test case for improved killing methods that would be used on future victims. My family had volunteered me to serve as a human experiment for a serial killer who was perfecting his techniques through systematic murder. Agent Martinez looked at my family with undisguised disgust. Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford, Miss Ashford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and participation in a criminal enterprise. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right. As federal agents placed handcuffs on the people who had spent months planning my death, I realized that their attempt to eliminate me had instead exposed and destroyed a network of killers that might have continued operating for years. Their greed and callousness had led to their own destruction and the protection of countless future victims. Ezra squeezed my hand as we watched them being led away in federal custody. They thought they could erase you from existence, he said quietly. Instead, they've ensured that their own existence will be erased by decades in federal prison. The next phase of the federal investigation required something that terrified me more than the poisoning itself. I would need to participate in an undercover operation designed to expose the full extent of Dr. Thornfield's murder network while gathering evidence that could be used to prosecute dozens of families who had killed their relatives with professional assistance. Agent Martinez explained the operation during a secure briefing in my hospital room 3 days after my family's arrest. My condition had stabilized significantly thanks to Dr. Park's antidote protocols, but I was still weak enough that anyone observing would believe I remained critically ill and vulnerable to additional attacks. Mrs. Blackstone, Agent Martinez said, Dr. Thornfield has agreed to cooperate with our investigation, but we need evidence of the network's ongoing operations. Several families are currently in various stages of eliminating relatives, and we need to stop those murders while gathering evidence that will ensure successful prosecutions. The plan was both elegant and terrifying in its simplicity. I would appear to die from complications related to my poisoning, complete with falsified medical records and a carefully staged funeral. This apparent success would encourage other families in the network to accelerate their own murder timelines, believing that the Ashford family's method had proven successful and undetectable. The key to this operation, Agent Martinez continued, is that Dr. Thornfield's remaining clients believe your family succeeded in eliminating you without arousing suspicion. They're already reaching out for consultations on their own family elimination projects, confident that the method has been proven safe and effective. Ezra's reaction to the proposal was immediate and emphatic. Absolutely not. You are not using my wife as bait to catch serial killers. I don't care about your investigation, I care about her safety. But Dr. Chen had been monitoring communications intercepted from the murder network, and her findings added urgency that was impossible to ignore. Mr. Blackstone, we've identified at least 8 families who are currently implementing poisoning protocols on their relatives. Without intervention, we estimate that 12 people will be murdered over the next 6 weeks. The weight of that number settled on everyone in the room. 12 innocent people would die agonizing deaths at the hands of their own families if we didn't act to stop the network's operations. My survival had exposed the conspiracy, but only active intervention could prevent additional murders. Agent Martinez, I said, surprised by how strong my voice sounded despite everything I'd endured, what would this operation actually involve? The federal plan was sophisticated beyond anything I could have imagined. I would be transferred to a secure federal medical facility where my recovery would continue under complete protection, while official records would show that I had died from complications related to organ failure. The funeral would be genuine enough to fool outside observers, complete with a closed casket and grieving widower, but attended by federal agents posing as family friends and business associates. The beauty of this approach, Agent Martinez explained, is that your apparent death will validate the network's methods and encourage them to become more active. Dr. Thornfield will be in controlled communication with his clients, providing them with detailed information about your family's successful elimination project while we monitor every conversation and gather evidence. Dr. Park had been developing protocols that would allow me to appear near death while maintaining complete safety. Mrs. Blackstone, we can use advanced medical techniques to create the appearance of declining vital signs and organ failure that would convince even sophisticated medical observers. You would be conscious and aware throughout the process, but anyone monitoring would believe you were dying naturally from the poisoning complications. The operation would require me to endure what appeared to be a gradual decline over several days, during which time federal agents would monitor communications between Dr. Thornfield and his other clients. As families in the network gained confidence from my apparent death, they would provide details about their own murder plans that could be used to prevent their crimes and prosecute them for conspiracy. The most important aspect of this operation, Agent Martinez said, is that it will allow us to identify victims before they're killed and intervene to save their lives. We know the general locations and time frames, but we need specific details about targets, methods, and timing that can only come from direct communication with the conspirators. Ezra was pacing the room with barely controlled energy, his business acumen warring with his protective instincts. Agent Martinez, what guarantees do I have that this operation won't put my wife in actual danger? Mr. Blackstone, your wife will be under the protection of federal agents with medical training at a secure facility with full hospital capabilities. She'll be safer during this operation than she would be in any civilian hospital, and the medical team will include the same specialists who've been treating her here. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been monitoring my cardiac recovery, provided additional reassurance. Mr. Blackstone, Mrs. Blackstone's condition has stabilized to the point where controlled medical simulation would pose minimal risk. The protocols Dr. Park has developed are based on techniques used in witness protection programs for high-value targets. The deciding factor came when Agent Martinez shared intelligence about the most urgent cases in their investigation. Mrs. Blackstone, we have a 16-year-old girl in Connecticut whose stepmother is currently implementing a poisoning protocol similar to what your family used. We have an elderly man in Massachusetts whose children have been systematically weakening his immune system while positioning themselves as devoted caregivers. We have a young mother in Virginia whose in-laws are preparing to eliminate her using techniques they learned from Dr. Thornfield's network. Each case represented not just a potential murder, but a family that had been corrupted by the same greed and callousness that had destroyed the Ashfords. The network had normalized murder to the point where people who considered themselves loving family members could systematically kill their relatives while maintaining complete psychological comfort with their actions. Agent Martinez, I said, feeling stronger than I had since this nightmare began, if we can save those people and destroy this network, then I need to do this. My family tried to erase me from existence, but I can use their attempt to save others from the same fate. Ezra sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed, his hand finding mine with the same gentle strength that had sustained me through the worst moments of the poisoning. Cassandra, I can't lose you. I won't lose you. If we do this, I need absolute guarantees that you'll be protected throughout the entire operation. Agent Martinez nodded with the confidence of someone who had planned operations of this scope before. Mr. Blackstone, your wife will have round-the-clock protection from agents with advanced medical training, direct communication with federal emergency response teams, and backup plans that ensure her safety regardless of how the operation develops. The next 24 hours were spent in detailed planning that covered every aspect of the operation from medical protocols to security arrangements to communication strategies that would allow me to maintain contact with Ezra while appearing to be dead to outside observers. The level of detail was both reassuring and terrifying, demonstrating that the federal government had extensive experience in operations of this type. Dr. Park explained the medical aspects with scientific precision that helped me understand exactly what would happen to my body during the simulation. Mrs. Blackstone, we'll use controlled medications that will slow your heart rate and breathing to levels that appear critical while maintaining complete safety. You'll be conscious but appear unconscious, and all vital signs will be monitored by federal medical personnel who can intervene immediately if anything unexpected occurs. As the operation date approached, I found myself thinking not about the risks to my own safety, but about the families who were currently planning the murders of their loved ones with the same casual efficiency that my parents had brought to eliminating me. The network had turned murder into a social activity where killers supported each other and shared techniques like members of a professional association. Agent Martinez, I said during our final planning session, promise me that when this is over, every family involved in this network will face the same justice that my family is facing. Mrs. Blackstone, when this operation concludes, Dr. Thornfield's entire network will be dismantled, and every family who participated in these murders will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Your courage is going to save lives and ensure that this type of systematic family murder never operates undetected again. The operation would begin in 18 hours, and I would appear to die from the same poisons that my family had used to try to eliminate me. But this time, my death would be a weapon against the killers rather than their victory. The undercover operation began at dawn on Thursday morning with a carefully choreographed transfer that would make my apparent death appear both tragic and inevitable to anyone monitoring the situation. Federal agents had transformed a wing of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center into what appeared to be a civilian intensive care unit, complete with falsified medical records that would document my declining condition over the following 72 hours. Dr. Park had refined her medical simulation protocols to achieve something I hadn't thought possible. I would remain fully conscious and aware while appearing to be in a deep coma progressing toward multi-organ failure. The medications flowing through my fore would slow my heart rate and breathing to barely detectable levels while specialized monitoring equipment would create false readings that would convince even experienced medical observers that I was dying. Mrs. Blackstone, Dr. Chen explained as she prepared the simulation equipment. You'll be able to hear everything happening around you, but you won't be able to move or respond. From outside observation, you'll appear to be unconscious and declining rapidly. Federal agents will be monitoring your actual vital signs through equipment that's invisible to visitors. Agent Martinez had positioned herself as my primary care coordinator, allowing her to control access to my room while monitoring communications between Dr. Thornfield and his network of clients. The investigation had revealed that news of my apparent success in being eliminated would trigger a coordinated acceleration of murder timelines across the network, as families gained confidence that their methods were proven and undetectable. Dr. Thornfield has been in communication with 8 families since your apparent hospitalization, Agent Martinez reported during the final briefing before the simulation began. They're all requesting detailed information about your family's methods, and several are planning to implement final poisoning phases within the next 2 weeks. The first phase of the operation involved creating believable documentation of my decline that would be shared with Dr. Thornfield's clients as evidence of successful elimination. Federal medical personnel created false test results showing progressive organ failure, fabricated consultation reports from fictional specialists, and generated the kind of detailed medical documentation that would convince sophisticated observers that my death was inevitable and natural. Ezra's role in the operation was perhaps the most challenging. He needed to portray a grieving husband whose wife was dying despite the best medical care available, while actually coordinating with federal agents to monitor and record every interaction with potential suspects. His performance needed to be convincing enough to fool Dr. Thornfield's clients who would undoubtedly research our family's situation before implementing their own murder plans. Mr. Blackstone, Agent Martinez said, several families in the network have already reached out through intermediaries to offer condolences and support during your wife's decline. They're positioning themselves as experienced families who understand the burden of medical decision-making during terminal situations. These contacts weren't motivated by genuine sympathy. They were intelligence-gathering operations designed to learn from our family's apparent success while building relationships that could provide mutual support during their own elimination projects. The network operated like a professional association where members shared expertise and provided each other with emotional and practical assistance. Dr. Thornfield's cooperation with federal investigators had revealed the sophisticated psychological framework that allowed ordinary families to rationalize systematic murder. The network provides families with a complete moral justification system, Agent Martinez explained. They convince themselves they're preventing suffering, eliminating burdens, and providing dignified transitions rather than committing murder for financial gain. The simulation began with Dr. Park administering the first round of medications that would create the appearance of rapid decline. As the drugs took effect, my heart rate dropped to levels that would alarm any medical observer, my breathing became shallow and irregular, and my responses to external stimuli disappeared completely. From outside observation, I appeared to be entering the final stages of multi-organ failure. Cassandra's condition has deteriorated significantly overnight, Ezra reported to one of the network families who had contacted him expressing concern and offering support. The doctors are saying we need to consider comfort care rather than continued aggressive intervention. These conversations were being recorded by federal agents, providing evidence of how the network operated to support families through the murder process while gathering intelligence about successful methods. The responses revealed families who had clearly been through similar experiences and were eager to share guidance about managing medical professionals and family dynamics during elimination projects. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartford from Connecticut, whose 16-year-old stepdaughter was currently being poisoned, provided detailed advice about timing the transition from medical intervention to comfort care. We found that the key is helping medical professionals understand that continuing aggressive treatment would be cruel rather than compassionate, she said during a recorded phone conversation with Ezra. Once they see the family united in wanting to prevent suffering, they become much more cooperative about allowing natural death to occur. Mr. Robert Chen from Massachusetts, whose elderly father was being systematically weakened, offered practical guidance about managing estate planning during medical crises. The important thing is having all the legal documentation prepared before the final stage, he explained. Power of attorney transfers, beneficiary updates, all of that should be completed while the target is still technically competent but too weak to resist family guidance. These conversations revealed families who had completely normalized murder as a practical solution to inheritance and caregiving challenges. They spoke about killing their relatives with the same casual efficiency that other people might use to discuss home renovation projects or vacation planning. Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Virginia, whose daughter-in-law was being prepared for elimination, provided detailed technical advice about managing medical professionals during the final phase. The key is making sure the attending physician believes the family is making difficult but loving decisions, she said. We've found that emphasizing quality of life concerns and financial realities helps doctors feel comfortable with discontinuing expensive interventions. Federal agents monitoring these conversations were gathering evidence that would destroy the entire network while identifying specific victims who could be saved through immediate intervention. Each family that contacted us provided details about their ongoing murder projects that allowed law enforcement to prevent additional deaths while building prosecutorial cases. The most disturbing aspect of these interactions was how the network families viewed successful elimination as an achievement worthy of congratulation and study. They analyzed my family's apparent success with the same professional interest that business executives might bring to examining a successful corporate strategy. Dr. Thornfield's role in facilitating these exchanges was becoming clear through his recorded communications with federal agents. He had created not just technical protocols for systematic poisoning, but an entire social framework that allowed families to support each other through the murder process while sharing methods and maintaining psychological comfort with their actions. Dr. Thornfield positioned himself as both technical consultant and family counselor, Agent Martinez explained during one of our secure briefings. He provided families with complete psychological frameworks for justifying murder while offering ongoing support through the elimination process and aftermath. By the second day of the simulation, news of my apparent decline had spread through the network, triggering accelerated timelines for multiple ongoing murder projects. Families who had been gradually implementing poisoning protocols over months suddenly moved to final phases, confident that the Ashford method had proven both effective and undetectable. We've identified imminent threats to 12 individuals, Agent Martinez reported. Federal agents are positioned to intervene in each case, but we need to time the interventions carefully to maximize evidence gathering while ensuring victim safety. The operation was succeeding beyond federal expectations, but it was also revealing the true scope of systematic family murder that had been operating undetected across multiple states. Dr. Thornfield's network represented just one component of what appeared to be a much larger criminal enterprise that had normalized killing relatives for financial gain within wealthy communities. As I lay in the federal medical facility, appearing to die while actually helping to save the lives of strangers who were facing the same fate my family had planned for me, I realized that my survival had exposed something far more sinister than a single family's greed. We had discovered an entire subculture where murder had become an accepted solution to family inconveniences, and my apparent death was about to provide the evidence needed to destroy it completely. The federal operation concluded 72 hours later with simultaneous raids across 6 states that dismantled Dr. Thornfield's entire murder network and saved the lives of 12 people who were in various stages of being systematically eliminated by their own families. My apparent death had provided the evidence needed to expose a criminal enterprise that had operated undetected for over 3 years, claiming at least 37 victims before my survival disrupted their operations. Agent Martinez coordinated my resurrection from a secure briefing room at the federal facility, surrounded by evidence that would ensure life sentences for dozens of conspirators who had turned family relationships into murder weapons. The scope of what had been uncovered was staggering. Families across multiple states had been participating in systematic elimination programs that disguised premeditated murder as compassionate end-of-life care. Mrs. Blackstone, Agent Martinez said as medical personnel removed the simulation equipment that had made me appear to be dying for 3 days, "Your courage has resulted in the largest family murder conspiracy prosecution in federal history." 43 individuals have been arrested for participating in systematic elimination of relatives, and Dr. Thornfield's cooperation has provided evidence that will ensure successful prosecutions in every case. The simultaneous arrests had netted families who were in various phases of murdering relatives, from early-stage poisoning protocols to final elimination events that were prevented only hours before they would have resulted in death. Elizabeth Hartford was arrested while preparing the final dose that would have killed her 16-year-old stepdaughter. Robert Chen was taken into custody as he attempted to administer what he believed would be a fatal overdose to his elderly father. Sarah Mitchell was arrested while consulting with a funeral director about arrangements for her daughter-in-law, who was still alive but scheduled to die within days. The network operated like a professional service industry, Agent Martinez explained as she showed me surveillance footage from the arrests. Dr. Thornfield provided technical expertise, psychological counseling, and ongoing support through what families viewed as a legitimate medical consultation service. They genuinely believed they were participating in advanced healthcare rather than systematic murder. Dr. Thornfield's files had revealed the sophisticated psychological framework he used to help ordinary people transition from loving family members to calculating killers. He provided families with complete moral justification systems that reframed murder as mercy, selfishness as compassion, and greed as practical responsibility for family welfare. The most disturbing aspect of this network, Dr. Park observed as she reviewed the medical evidence from dozens of cases, is how Dr. Thornfield normalized systematic murder by making it appear medical and scientific. Families convinced themselves they were implementing advanced healthcare protocols rather than committing premeditated murder. Ezra had spent the 3 days of the operation coordinating with federal agents while maintaining the performance of a grieving husband, but his relief at my actual survival was evident as he held me for the first time since the simulation began. "Cassandra, I know why you agreed to do this, but I never want to go through anything like that again. Watching you appear to die, even knowing it was simulation, was the worst experience of my life." The legal proceedings that followed would reshape how law enforcement approached family violence and inheritance-related crime. My case became the foundation for federal legislation that required mandatory reporting of suspicious family medical emergencies and enhanced investigation protocols for deaths that benefited surviving relatives financially. My family's trial began 6 months later, with my parents and sister facing federal charges that would ensure they spent the rest of their lives in prison. The evidence against them was overwhelming: detailed documentation of their conspiracy, recorded confessions, physical evidence from their home laboratory, and testimony from Dr. Thornfield about their participation in his murder network. Mrs. Diane Ashford, Mr. Gregory Ashford, Miss Natalie Ashford, Judge Patricia Williams said during sentencing, "You participated in a criminal enterprise that turned family relationships into weapons of murder. You systematically poisoned a daughter and sister for financial gain, and your actions contributed to a network that claimed dozens of innocent lives. My mother received life without possibility of parole. My father received life plus 20 years for his role in managing the financial aspects of the conspiracy. Natalie received 45 years for her participation and her plans to monetize my death through social media exploitation. Dr. Thornfield cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for avoiding the death penalty, but his sentence of life without parole plus 150 years ensured he would never be released. His consultation business was revealed to have generated over $2.3 million in fees from families who paid premium prices for professional murder services disguised as medical consultation. "The Thornfield Network represents a new category of criminal enterprise," said FBI Director Sarah Chen during a press conference following the convictions. Systematic family murder conducted with scientific precision and psychological manipulation that allowed ordinary people to rationalize killing their relatives for financial gain. The investigation had revealed connections between Dr. Thornfield's network and similar operations in other regions, suggesting that systematic family murder had become a nationwide industry that preyed on greed, desperation, and the trust inherent in family relationships. Federal agencies launched expanded investigations that would ultimately expose additional networks operating in 12 other states. 2 years after my apparent death and actual resurrection, Ezra and I established the Cassandra Foundation, dedicated to identifying and preventing family violence that masquerades as medical care. Our work focuses on training medical professionals to recognize signs of systematic poisoning, developing protocols for protecting vulnerable family members, and supporting survivors of family-perpetrated violence. "The most important lesson from our experience," I said during the Foundation's launch event, "is that family relationships can be corrupted by greed to the point where love becomes predation. We need systems that protect vulnerable people from the people who are supposed to protect them." The Foundation's research has identified patterns of family violence that extend far beyond systematic poisoning to include financial exploitation, medical neglect, and psychological manipulation that isolates victims from outside support. Our protocols have been adopted by hospitals nationwide and have already prevented dozens of suspicious deaths that bore hallmarks of family-perpetrated murder. Dr. Park joined our foundation as Chief Medical Officer, developing screening protocols that can identify victims of systematic family poisoning before their conditions become critical. Her work has revolutionized how medical professionals approach family dynamics during medical emergencies, with particular attention to financial motivations that might influence family decision-making. The Ashford case taught us that sophisticated criminals can manipulate medical systems just as effectively as they manipulate their victims, Dr. Park explained during a medical conference where she presented our findings. We need to be suspicious when families demonstrate more concern about costs than outcomes, or when their knowledge of medical procedures exceeds what would be expected from concerned relatives. Agent Martinez, who has become a close friend and advisor to our foundation, continues to investigate family murder networks that operate across state lines. Her work has identified systematic patterns of inheritance-motivated violence that suggest organized criminal enterprises have been exploiting family relationships for decades without detection. The Thornfield network was just the beginning, Agent Martinez said during a recent strategy session. We've identified at least 6 similar operations that use different methods but the same basic framework: professional consultation services that help families eliminate relatives while maintaining plausible deniability. Has also revealed the scope of systematic family violence that continues to operate undetected across the country. The Foundation's work represents an ongoing battle against criminal enterprises that weaponize family relationships for financial gain. 3 years after my family tried to erase me from existence, I've built a life dedicated to ensuring that their attempt to silence me instead amplified voices of other victims and created systems that protect vulnerable people from the people who are supposed to love them unconditionally. Some betrayals destroy families, but others create new purposes that extend far beyond personal survival. My family's greed and cruelty led to their destruction, but it also led to the protection of strangers who will never know that their lives were saved by someone else's refusal to disappear quietly. The helicopter that brought Ezra to save me that night has become a symbol of the Foundation's work: rapid response to crisis situations where family members need protection from their own relatives. Sometimes salvation comes from the sky, and sometimes it comes from refusing to let betrayal be the end of your story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.